Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. This is episode 61. I'll be speaking with PJ from Sydney, Australia. You might remember him. He published a story here on May 7th, Notes from Down Under, Meetings, Storytellers, Fellowship, and Sobriety. And that's pretty much what this podcast is about. PJ's story, other people's stories, the fellowship, and sobriety. I think you'll enjoy this one. Hey PJ, how you doing?
Look, John, I'm okay, but I'm very nervous, but that's okay. I've told you about it, so that's okay, yeah.
Well, as I said, I love doing this, and I'm here relaxed, got a cup of coffee. I know you're over there with a cup of tea, and we'll just sit back and have a little conversation, a couple of AA friends.
Absolutely, okay, we'll be fine.
You know, a good way to get to know people, and something I like to do here, and that people enjoy and get a lot of good benefit from is just the sharing of our stories and our experience. And I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved with the program, and maybe we can just take it from there.
Yeah, I'd love to, John. Look, I'm from an Irish oral storytelling background. While I'm in Australia, you know, I migrated here in '89, so my background is storytelling, and that element of AA I really took to, you know. Yeah. But look, so my story, look, mine is before I got near, I just talk about it a bit, is before I got near my first drink. My first drink, I was a shock duck. I had all this anxiety as a kid and ungrounded fears, you know, and I was always ill at ease growing up. And I was that way from my earliest memory to my first drink at 19. And, you know, I don't come from an alcoholic family or a violent background or anything I could say that should make me feel that way, but I just was. And I guess the description I'd put is, you know, it was like being on AM and everyone else around me on FM. I just had trouble figuring out what was going on, and anything to do with social groups was a real challenge, you know. But I was good at school and I liked school, but anything to do with sports. And in my teens then, you know, I became interested in girls and terrified. I would have thrown up all over them if I'd gone near them, you know. So, you know, you can't tell anyone that, you know, it's what do they think or how do you explain it? But, you know, but I managed this sort of all the time, and I couldn't eat food in front of people or getting on buses, like all this sort of phobias, I suppose. Yeah. But anyway, I was in Dublin at 19 in this pub in Dublin, and there was some nice looking girls there, and I was keen to, you know, introduce myself, but I would have thrown up all over them. It was terrible, you know. But a friend of mine, Nick, bought me my first drink, and I didn't plan on being an alcoholic. You know, it wasn't a career move. And I didn't like people that drank too much, but I had a few mouthfuls and began to feel a bit better, and I had a few more mouthfuls. And, you know, the effect for the alcoholics will understand this, you know, it's a big changer. And I went from being socially completely inept to being able to suddenly, you know, participate. And that was wonderful, you know, and I could talk to girls, and, you know, I thought, oh, you know, the answer to life is I have 4 or 5 drinks. I can do all this, and that's all you got to do, you know.
Reminds me of Bill W.'s account of his first drink. I remember he was, exactly the same thing, kind of withdrawn at a party for World War I vets, and had that kind of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I got sober, I heard a guy share one night, he reckoned he was born about 5 drinks short of normal. And when he had 5 drinks, he felt normal. And that's a good description of me. But when I had that first drink, you know, in hindsight, I had that physical compulsion, you know. I had that pull to have more, and I got that mental obsession. You know, I didn't realize that's what was happening. But look, I'm somebody that never needed instruction in drinking, you know. I was probably, apart from breathing air, it's one of the most natural things I've done, you know. I've never had to buy a book called Drinking for Dummies.
No.
I never had to do a course called The Beginner's Guide to the Consumption of Alcohol, you know?
Yeah.
Now, sobriety has been the opposite, you know? I've needed all the help I could get. But look, my drinking story, you know, wasn't all bad. I had a ball. Like, my first 5 years was compared to how I was, was a wonderful time. And I loved that I was a Guinness drinker, and I discovered a thing called Bushmills single malt whiskey. And, I used to dream about drink, and I used to love the anticipation of the first one, I used to love picking the first one up in my hand and the way you'd lift it up, and I love the way the glass would kiss your lower lip. And as you tipped it back, I love the way it would go into your mouth, under your tongue, back towards your throat. And when you swallowed, there was just this spot it got, And it was, as I said, look, it was magic. But, I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholism's progressive. The longer I drank, the worse it got. So, blackouts came along, drink driving. I never got caught, fortunately. Coming to in strange places, that morning after, what have I done? How am I going to get out of this one? And I met a lady who, unfortunately, for her, I married. And, it wasn't long before she was saying things like, why can't you have 2 drinks like everybody else? Which I didn't know why I couldn't have 2 drinks. So my answer to that was, well, I'll only let her see me have 2 drinks.
Yeah.
So then the sneak drinking starts, and the hiding it. And, she used to say things like, you're a nice bloke, except when you drink. I couldn't get over it. And, it just progresses on and it gets worse and worse. So we decided we'd migrate to Australia. And 6 weeks after we got married, actually, we came here. And so I replicated my problems beautifully here.
Wow.
So alcoholism comes with you. You don't have to pack.
How old were you when you moved to Australia?
I was 29.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was all, the new life and the new hope and, the new country and the promise of everything. And it is, Australia was tremendous. But,
sure.
I was still drinking. And interestingly, going back in my story, when I was around 25, like all the anxieties and fears were just getting very problematic. And I was put in touch with a doctor who dabbled a bit in psychology. And over a 10-week period, he taught me relaxation techniques and explained to me, what was going on with my nervous system. And I got to the point where I could eat in front of people, I could get on buses. So it really allowed me to manage all of that. But you know what? I still had to drink, and I was no longer drinking in order to overcome the anxieties, And that was a real watermark, I still needed to drink, whereas before I could say, well, I need to drink because I'm anxious.
Yeah.
But, it's only since coming into AA I look back on that, But, we came to Australia and, for a while I had a new job. You're busy, I had to do a lot of exams. My wife was doing exams. Like we were trying to catch up. But, I was a binge drinker. I was a stop-start periodic. I could give it up for long periods of time. I stopped drinking for over a year, and giving up for months wasn't unusual. And I thought, you can't be an alcoholic if you can stop.
Yeah.
Where have I heard that before?
Right.
And yet, when you come into AA, you hear people say the name of so-and-so, they're an alcoholic, and they haven't had a drink for so long,
Right.
But I thought that, saying that you were an alcoholic and you didn't drink was a complete contradiction.
Yeah.
It was like saying it's a corpse that's alive.
Yeah.
It made I just couldn't grasp that idea. I just didn't want to admit I was an alcoholic. Look, the reason I wound up coming to AA was pressure from my wife. She was pretty, a strong-willed person. And she said, look, you got to do something about this because I'm not putting up with it. I used to, not come home at night and disappear and I'm drunk, and I was verbally abusive, and we're not nice, John.
We're not.
Yeah, I know, and I don't wallow in it, but I don't forget that. That I'm sitting here talking to you, and I'm reasonable, I hope. But when I was drinking, anything could happen. I was Jekyll and Hyde,
Yeah, I was too. I was pretty unpredictable. I was pretty unreliable. I was fortunate for me. I was living by myself, so people weren't too affected by me. But still, yeah, I was like that too. I wouldn't come home sometimes.
Yeah, no. Anyway, so I went to see this psychologist through work, and she said to me, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, my marriage is a bit in a bit of trouble, and my wife thinks I drink too much. So, she asked me then about how much I drank and when I had my first drink and quantities, and I felt very, very anxious about that. I didn't feel happy with that at all. And of course, I lied and told her I drank only a fraction, as you do. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it all, she says, well, you are exceeding the recommended, maximum intake of alcohol. Yeah. Said, look, there's two options here. One is you're an alcoholic, which means you can never, ever drink again. And the other is you're a heavy drinker who's lost control, and I can teach you how to do control drinking. So, I'll give you one guess which option I went for.
Yeah.
And of course, this means you can have to have 2 standard drinks a day. And a standard drink is what they call a midi in Australia, which is like half a pint or less. It's tiny,
Yeah. During this section of the podcast, I temporarily lost my connection with PJ, but called him right back. Okay, so we'll just kind of pick up where we left off there.
Yeah.
Do you recall where you were when we dropped off? We were talking about where you were at. You were visiting the psychologist, and she was recommending that you were going to go ahead and try controlled drinking.
Yeah, we tried that, and it was a disaster. But she did get me to go to AA, which was a real positive because it spoiled my drinking.
Yeah,
I wasn't ready for it, but I'm a big fan of the power of a meeting. If you have someone they don't think they're an alcoholic, take them to a meeting. It spoiled my drinking, and then it primed me for down the track.
Mm-hmm.
I did come back, and also to give her due. I worked through a lot of my upbringing, my childhood. I spent about 18 months, and I did resolve quite a few things that were bothering me from when I was growing up. But that's not going to keep you sober until you accept that first step. That's been my experience, So to make a long story short, eventually my wife just left, and I thought, oh, this, is terrible. But you know what? I can drink as I want, and she's not around. She's not going to see me anymore. I don't have to limit my drinks. I don't have to pretend. And within about 8 months, I went right downhill. Not financially, I was still holding down the job. I was actually getting promoted at work, of all things. But my consumption massively increased, and then what began to happen was my resistance to, I just was getting drunk easier, and all the fears came back, and I was just at a point where I was going to try and do myself in. That's just the truth, And on my weekends off, I spent on my own. I just go out to the bar to buy a drink, maybe buy a case of beer. And that was it. It was terrible, the loneliness, the fears, the resentments. And through a friend of mine, she redirected me back to this psychologist who said to me, to give her due, she said, look, you haven't had so much success with me, but my colleague next door has had a lot to do with alcoholics. So I went to see him, and he said, what's happening? So I told him the poor PJ story, mm-hmm. which I thought must be the saddest story in the world. Mm. And he didn't think so. and he just said to me, what about your drinking? And I said, look, if I could sort my life out first and get it all straightened, maybe I could look at the drinking. And he said, I think you have it the wrong way around. And, if you deal with your drinking first, let's get the drink out of the picture, first of all. Mm-hmm. And we'll deal with what's left. And he said, I'm pretty sure if you manage to do this, a lot of your problems will disappear. And he was correct, because drink driving ended, blackouts ended, coming to strange places. All of that garbage and rubbish that we pull on ourselves just went. So he said, you got to go to AA. I didn't want to go. Mm-hmm. And I said, I've been there. And he says, well, look, Alcoholics Anonymous is where alcoholics go to learn how to lead a life without needing to drink. And that's what I found in AA pretty much.
Yeah.
The pub is full of alcoholics who are experts on drinking. So, which bunch of experts do you want to be with?
True.
So, I begrudgingly went the next night. I parked the car a few blocks away. I was watching the front door mm-hmm. to see who was going in. Anonymity, the protection of anonymity in AA was very welcome.
Yeah, it was for me too.
I'd been to 2 meetings, so I had some idea. look, what I got was a warm handshake, which is just so much.
Yeah.
And the guy said, just try and listen. And he came up to me at the end of the meeting and just said, whatever you do, don't pick up the first drink and come to another meeting. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'd say to anybody new,
Yeah.
Just that's what you got to do. And I went to another meeting and another meeting and another meeting. And, I've been sober since then. And, it's been hard. It's been all sorts of things. But there's always AA. And, I've made a lot of contacts now and a lot of resources. But it just takes time,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was...
Yeah, I always urge newcomers and let them know that, from my experience too, that, the main thing is it's really tough in the beginning because a lot of your problems from your drinking have to play out while you're still sober. But the good thing is you're not adding to those problems. There's no more DWIs. There's no more court dates. There's none of that kind of crap from your drinking. But it does take some time, and it's really difficult to kind of ride through that, So so tell me, what was your impression of AA? I mean, now you're now involved in secular AA, and was the religious aspect of the program bothering you at the time, or was it very religious in Australia? Can you tell me a little bit about what the meetings are like there and how your impression was of them?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to meetings in the US a few times, so I would classify the US and Ireland very religious,
Mm-hmm.
And this is a secular country by and large. And there's a lot of people here who've never been inside a church in their life, In
Australia?
So, yeah. And that was a shock. When I came here, like I was a practicing Catholic when I did come to Australia. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed at people I worked with. They'd never been to a church. And they're decent people. This is when I was practicing and believed Catholicism was the only way to go. But with the meetings, I hated the word God, and I couldn't say it in the Serenity Prayer. They close the meetings here generally with the Serenity Prayer, and I couldn't say that word. But with the meetings, I think the overriding influence was like that first meeting back where I actually got sober. There were people with amazing stories. There's a few guys there who lived in parks, dereliction, been in jails, drunk, alcohol. But they were well dressed and they were happy.
Yeah.
So I think that was this with me. If you get my curiosity stirred up about something, you've got me,
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't understand this conundrum. So I just kept coming back. But, I wasn't able to read, in the beginning, I couldn't remember who spoke at a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
If you asked me the names, people said, you got to read a big book. I couldn't read a paragraph on, the Just for Today card.
Yeah.
My head was racing. But so my sense of AA in the beginning was the warmth of it,
mm-hmm.
the generosity of people, really, the handshakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I did receive a lot of, kindness in the beginning, a lot of sort of, because I tend to jump in. I got to jump in and do the steps, and maybe I'm sober 9 months and I'm still struggling with the first step, and somebody else is in 3 months and they're up to step 10, and
right.
I got it quick. But the old timers say, look, you just got to settle down, and basically get into the habit of meetings. That's just a very normal thing that I do. So the religious part and the God element, there are some very religious people. When I came in, what they used to say is, leave your religion at the door on the way into a meeting and pick up on the way out.
There you go. That's a good suggestion.
It is. And by and large, I come across some very religious people, very much practicing Catholics and Anglicans, but you'd never hear them say it at the meeting.
Yeah.
So it was that sort of separation, there was a place for it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that. But then again, you would get some people, and I think it's a more recent phenomena here that it's a bit more churchy. That being said, it's very difficult to have an objective view of that, or maybe it's my sensitivity to it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know. But like I certainly had trouble with the God part in the beginning. But look, what I figured out was that, you put the drink down, you come to meetings, you need something more powerful than you to help you, right?
Yeah.
I knew that. And this guy Stan from Ramsgate. See, I had the industrial strength Irish Catholicism beaten into me as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
He had the same Anglican version,
Mm-hmm.
and he said to me, you know, like, he helped me unwind that God of fear and, you know, the retribution and, you know, watch yourself, you know.
Yeah.
So what I did was I began to, you know, go through the 3rd step prayer, the 7th step prayer, and say the words, and it seemed to kind of work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a level, I guess, of comfortability. But I'm never someone that could say, you know what, John, I got God right here beside me. You know,
Yeah.
I never, like, I got a direct line. He's on Skype, you know, I'm having a chat, you know. But the thing is like, that was one part of the overwhelming change of my life by coming to AA, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I just like the people. And
Yeah.
I now know it's the fellowship, you know, first and foremost. That's the driver, really.
Yeah.
And I used to go to meetings with Alkies. We used to go out places and we'd have laughter. And when I was feeling down, I talked to them. And so it was just a big bunch of people just like me. And we were all keeping each other sober.
Yeah.
That's what was working. So it was like I had icing on a cake, but there was no need for the icing, you know.
Right.
The cake really was the fellowship. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that was similar to my experience too. I really didn't have any issue. I didn't have any religious background whatsoever, but I kind of went on. It didn't seem like they were pushing the religious stuff too much in the very, very beginning, but it might also be that I didn't really pay attention to it, that I was really more focused on the stories and just the fact that I was in a room full of people who actually listened to me and cared about me and had the same experiences as I did, and I felt safe there. So I wasn't so bothered by it. But what started happening, and you mentioned something in there about how the old timers would tell you, just relax, take it easy, you know, when we're all anxious about the steps. Those guys are wise, and they're very right, and I've come to understand that too. But when I was a newcomer, and I see people now who are just starting out do the same thing, you see those steps or you see that big book and you think, I just got to do it just so. And if I don't do it, I'm not going to get sober. You know, and people put a lot of pressure on themselves, you know, looking for, I guess, some kind of a magic answer. But really, it's just the meetings. And a lot of the stuff I found, you kind of get through osmosis. You know, you kind of pick up from other people in the meetings. Yeah,
I would agree. And you just jogged my memory, because there was, when I came in, a kind of a fundamentalist group had started up, and they were doing the steps from the big book, and they would descend on meetings and they'd have maybe a sprinkling of 4 or 5 of them, and they would all have, it wasn't really a share, it was a sales pitch, you know, that if, like with my group, we have a sponsor and we do the steps this way out of the big book.
Right.
And it was so, you know, being new, you jump. You know, so and when you stand up at a meeting and say anyone under 90 days, then that's it. You're like got a target on you, and they latch to you. And this guy, you know, he latched onto me and he took me to meetings, and I very quickly I operate on gut feeling a lot, you know, and I sensed this isn't right, and I found then that I could only go to meetings they reckoned I should go to. I could only talk to people they thought I could talk. Yeah, but he did say, to give him his due, he did say, you know, if it doesn't work out, you can find someone, you know, we just leave it. And which I plucked up the courage to do that. And of course, then I felt uncomfortable because I would see these guys in the meetings, like the general meetings. So you have to sort of overcome that a bit, you know. But I latched on to old timers, and they said, look, don't worry about them. These were people with 35 and 40 years sobriety.
Yeah.
Mind you, all these people with the answer had less than 5.
Oh, I know.
No, 6 months.
Yeah.
And there's a saying, Relaxer Jack, who died this year, he got sober in 1953. And he was a big loss. But he used to say, you know, the young man knows it all. The old man has seen it all.
There you go.
It's very telling.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
They were experts, you know. But look, I was resentful at them for a while. But, you know, you just get over it and you move on. And you sort of have to, you got to learn how to manage yourself and survive in AA too in the beginning, you know. It's, But anyway, that was, you know, put me right off them. I stuck with the old timers. I couldn't read. I was literate, but my head was racing. And then, you know, a guy called Little Davy said to me, there's plenty of people in AA can't read and write. Or even if they can read at a very low level.
Yeah.
And there's a guy, I don't know if I should mention names, but he's on the Northern Beaches. He's sober 53 years, but he's always on the beach at Manly, and he can't read and write. He'll tell you that himself. But what he has done is taken new, fragile people. He'll have them on the beach, and he gives them the sun, surf, and sand treatment, you know? Go for a run on the sand. He'll massage the anger out of them, the anxiety out of them, you know? Just have them outdoors. And one guy, you know, that he took under his wing wound up getting his bronze surf life-saving certificate, you know?
Cool.
And he can't read and write, you know? But there's a bunch of people I know who've sort of been through his school of sun, surf, and sand. Yeah, so there's many ways basically to get sober and stay sober. You know, you got to have an open mind. You know that there's, you know, and Stan from Ramsgate used to say, you know, there's no wrong way to get sober, and there's no right way to pick up that first drink.
There you go.
You know, so like I quote people a bit because they said stuff that was very important for me. You know, and I like to keep it alive. I like to try and remember and remind myself. Yeah. So yeah, with the religious stuff, I kind of, around about 17 years sober, I was doing the prayers, I was saying all this stuff, and it felt hollow, you know? But I just, look, if in doubt, you know, just keep coming to meetings, see what happens. You know, it takes time. I didn't know atheists existed in AA, you know?
Yeah, same here.
I was unaware until I was in Florida December 2015, and I went to a meeting, and this guy shared that he was an atheist. And I was amazed. And he said, no, there's not one of those steps I can't put into my life. And he said, you know, don't believe these people that tell you have to have God, and, you know, it has to be a particular Christian God or whatever. And the next lady who spoke after him was a Christian, and her share was just a lambasting of him. But it didn't matter because I'd heard him, you know. And then a few weeks later, I was in Berkeley, California, and I went to an atheist AA meeting because now I was starting to search online, you know. And I was in a room with about 20 atheists.
Wow.
And that was mind-blowing. And the secretary gave me, you know, some details, your website. I think at that stage it was AA Agnostica. I think AA Beyond Belief came along. Was it 2016, was it?
2015, September.
Yeah, okay. So then I latched on to that, and, you know, I got some books, you know, Common Sense Sobriety and the
That's
Alternative.
a good one, Adam.
Common Sense Sobriety. We sell that at our meeting. You know, that's one of the books that we advertise.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah. And, you know, it's fellowship, really. It's, you know, you're in touch with like-minded people, and you're not alone. You're not the only one. Yeah, so I was starting to get, I met an atheist friend of mine, Dave, and he had, this is in 2015, January, he'd come out of a detox, and he was at one of his first meetings out and about. And he got up to speak, and he just said, I'm an atheist and have been for a long time, and I'm trying to come to terms with the God language, you know? But he was actually sitting beside me. When he sat down, I just put my hand out and said, I'm an atheist too. So we exchanged numbers, and then we talked about starting a meeting, and then I went to a couple of meetings that were particularly godlike.
Yeah.
So I rang Dave and I said, I'm over, let's do it. So it took about 8 months to locate a venue and decide what to do, and, you know, and then there's all these doubts because it's sort of like coming out, you know.
Yeah, it is.
And you're you know, and when you started to share at meetings, I'm an atheist, you know, and some people that I knew for a long time and I thought were really good friends, you mention that A word, and they're looking at you, you know, they take a step back.
Yeah, that's hard to go through that.
Yeah, couldn't care less. So, and then I'm thinking, are we mad starting this meeting, you know? Really, you know, do you have to do it? And, but we decided, you know, and we started in the end of January this year. So we're very new. and it's been wonderful. It's been amazing, yeah. And I'm now, no doubt, we've definitely should have started it, and it has been a benefit to a lot of people because they're like Dave reckons there's an untapped market of atheists out there, and he's absolutely
there is.
Right. Yeah. So we're tapping them, you know?
Absolutely. That's the whole thing that I found too. And you know, when we started our group, I was okay. I just left my old home group and I didn't even tell anybody what we were doing. And we weren't really, you know, looking to get anybody who was already going to AA. Although we did let the other AA groups know that we were out there, but we started getting people that wouldn't have anything to do with AA otherwise, and they were finding our group, and that's what was so rewarding for me because that's really what I was kind of hoping too. So we're kind of really bringing people in who might not ever just avoid AA altogether, probably.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, Dave and I had fully expected that for the first 3 months it'd just be two of us. And we had organized our finances to fund it for, 3 months just on our own. And the first person to walk into our meeting on our first day was a Canadian.
Wow.
And he had just come from Bangkok that morning. He'd been in Thailand for 3 months, hadn't been to a meeting in all that time, nearly busted, was off his head. And he walks in and he says, "Is the coffee on?" You know? And that was it. And what I didn't realize, you see, being my age and that, is the power of the internet. I still don't fully appreciate it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'd forgotten that people will just use a smartphone and Google a meeting.
Yep.
And we come up, you see, we got listed online straight away.
Yep.
And we just come up, and people who not necessarily looking for an atheist meeting see it's a meeting. Like they come out of detoxes and they'll, they see it's the only Monday meeting at midday in our area. So it's the, and since then we've had, quite a few overseas people as well. That's just amazed me. But and we're kind of learning, the format of the meeting was different. We've shifted it a bit. It's very much, the main meetings when I came in, the vast majority of meetings are what's called ID or identification. Okay. Which ran an hour and a half, and people would get up and share their stories, what they were like, what happened, what they're like now.
Okay.
And that was meetings I kind of cut my teeth on. There were steps meetings as well, but more recently, there's big book study groups and there's topic meetings, as Bill sees it, daily reflections. So we wanted to have an ID meeting because really we just wanted to tell a story, and it's also your getting sober story, but also your atheist story, So you're then talking about, how you figure that bit out. Well, this is our idea anyway, as much as, we're sort of learning as we go. And we only have an hour, which is short in Sydney because most meetings are an hour and a half.
Oh.
So, we like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of shift the format a little bit and cut down. We were reading out more about alcoholism, but we had to cut that out. So we're up and running within 5 minutes, like from when we opened the meeting. That's first person to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of groups that go through a lot of opening ceremonies that take like 15 minutes to start the meeting.
I did meetings in Canada, and it was the minutes of last week's meetings and the financial report. And I'm thinking, I'm not here. I couldn't care. I want to hear an alcoholic.
Yeah. I kind of liked it when I was many, many years ago, back in the 90s. I experienced AA in New England, and boy, I just loved it. But I almost felt like I was at a town hall meeting or something, But those meetings were an hour and a half too. And they would take a break, and they would have an auction and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So, the meeting's going really well. We're regularly getting, double figures. I think our max is 14.
That's great.
And also we've attracted regular people too, because I don't know about your meeting, but one of the problems we experienced was people used to refer to us as other atheists, and we are an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And one of the guys who was very new, actually, and he shared that he went to some of the other local meetings, and because he's under 90 days, he gets some attention. And, this guy was asking him, what meetings are you doing? And when he mentioned our group, they said, oh, don't go there. They're atheists.
Yeah.
And he said, they're alcoholics. And, I've used that line myself because sometimes someone will say to me, so how's your atheist meeting going? I said, it's a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yep.
So you have to really push that. This is what we are. We are Alcoholics Anonymous, with a door that is that bit wider to capture somebody who's not sure about the God stuff.
Yeah. And too, at our group, sometimes people refer to other AA meetings as so-called traditional AA. And I was talking to a woman at one of our meetings last weekend or whatever, and I told her, I said, I wish that we would just kind of do away with that term traditional AA, because it makes people think that we're somehow different from, and we're not. We're just Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't pray.
No,
we don't have group prayers.
Yeah, that's right. And this is ultimately, realistically, you shouldn't have to have separate atheist meetings.
Shouldn't.
If you're there to talk about your problems with alcohol and how you've recovered and what you're doing, you shouldn't need to go into God. We wouldn't need it. But that being said, I don't want to be seen as an opposition group.
No.
It's kind of more marketing, really, how you pitch yourself. But one of the things we decided to do when we were starting the group was we don't want to get into being at loggerheads with other groups or with the local committee. And, we got ourselves listed. We're contributing to the local service office. And, I've also had some people that go to the so-called regular meetings come to visit us,
Mm-hmm.
And one guy put it really, they'll stand up and say, I have a faith, but they don't go into it.
Yeah.
And, fine. It's fine. But one guy said, he said, I like coming to this group because I like the people who are here.
Yeah.
That's the fellowship, If you just attract people to that, I think that's really what we're trying to achieve. And also we got a lady that came 2 weeks ago, her first ever AA meeting, and she sought us out because we're atheists.
Right.
Which leads on to an interesting issue, because people like myself, we've sort of transitioned to atheism.
Right.
So I've gotten sober, I've figured things out, I've got a few decades up, and then I'm thinking, I'm really an atheist.
Yep.
So, but you have all of this foundation. And
right. That was my experience. Our call was disconnected for a second time, so I called PJ right back. This happened once before with a conversation I was having with Kaylee P. in Ireland, but everything works out okay. So this must be an Irish thing.
I know, but I would suggest you're the common denominator here.
Well, we were really having an interesting discussion there. You're talking about, you and I have this in common, that we started out in AA having a couple decades of sobriety before we realized we were an atheist. Yes. And AA. But now we have this whole other group of people who are coming to our group who've never been to AA before, and they're coming to our secular group. And you said that's an interesting situation arises from that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is your experience with that? I mean, you guys are further along. I'd be interested to hear, have you dealt with it in any specific way, or do you make any changes at all? Or
well, it is very interesting. I have some thoughts about it. We really haven't done anything, but here's the different kinds of people that we have to our group. First of all, the two that started it was me and another guy. We've had experience in AA. Decided we understood how to interpret the steps. We go to our group. Then we start getting all these other people who either stopped going to AA and started coming back because of our group, or people that would never go to AA to begin with. And now we have a lot of newcomers and even a lot of younger people who have never, ever, ever been to an AA meeting other than a secular meeting. And what's really interesting about that is our group doesn't use the big book. And it's not that we don't like the big book so much. It's just that it's really hard for us to relate to it, because of the language that the book uses. So they don't really have the benefit of understanding the history and the culture of AA. And I kind of think that that's important to have. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind of trying to find a way to do some sort of a meeting. I don't know if I want to have big book meetings or anything like that, but have some sort of a meeting that gives people an appreciation for the history of AA and how we got to where we are. But yeah, there's a lot of people that that they have no idea that what a religious AA meeting is like, and they hear people, because we have another group of people who come to our meetings who have had some really bad experiences in AA, because we do have some fairly dogmatic groups around here, and they have just been beaten, and they come to our group, and then they kind of do a lot of venting. So the people who have never experienced the religious sort of AA listen to these people that are venting, and almost scares them from ever wanting to go to an AA meeting. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if I really have any answers, but I did at a meeting not too long ago. I chose a reading from Ernest Kurtz's book, Not God, which was a kind of an interesting reading, and it had to do with what you were talking about, the sharing of personal stories. And it was kind of nice because it also gave a little bit of history and background of AA, and I thought that was kind of a nice way to kind of talk about the history a little bit. But I don't know if I really have any answer, but it is an interesting thing to observe that we have this whole group of people who are sober. I mean, we have people who've been sober now we're coming up on a year sober and so forth, that have never been to a traditional AA meeting. There I am using the word. Don't know the big book, never opened, some of them don't even know what a big book is. So, it's really interesting,
Yeah, I don't know, because what you say there of linking it to the history of AA, I think that's really crucial, because we could have a situation where the seculars come in and they're like a separate entity to AA. And my thoughts are, if possible, we should all be under the one umbrella, as much as we can. I mean, that being said, it's not always possible, but one of the things that what got me sober was in the meetings, there were old timers who knew the co-founders of AA in Australia, and they used to talk about them. And then how I started reading the big book was the stories. And I still read it today. I divide it in two. So the first section of all what to do, and then the stories. And I'll read a story a day, and I'll read maybe 4 or 5 pages in the first section. And I'll skip, of course, the bits that, I can't. It just mean nothing to me. But the stories are very important to me still,
Yeah.
But in relation to the new people, I don't know. We'll have to sort of wait and see, I suppose.
But there's no harm. They're doing well, and they're happy. And we do have, and one thing good about we're here, we do have a lot of secular meetings. So we have like a meeting every day of the week here in KC, and we're going to start another one up pretty soon.
Wow.
So, they can get to a lot of meetings.
Yeah. And what's the population of Kansas like?
Well, Kansas City, Missouri itself proper has a population of about 400,000. So it's pretty, it's a good sized city, but it's not huge. But the metropolitan area is pretty spread out, and it covers both states, Kansas and Missouri. Yeah. And there's over 1 million.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good pretty good sized metropolitan area. But like all big cities too, it's kind of broken down little neighborhoods, and it's very different from one part of the city to the next. Yeah. And we're fortunate. I love the city, but here we have a really nice environment here. It's a kind of a liberal city, accepting place. Our group is pretty well thought of here in our community, I think, and have always been accepted from the beginning. And that's helped, I think, because it's easy for people to find us. Our central office will recommend people to come to our group, that are looking for an alternative like that. So,
yeah. Well, I think you need a minimum size population to get a bit of diversity.
Yeah.
And we have about 5 million here.
Oh, Lord.
In Sydney. So, and that's what I should say is what I've said to you about my experience of AA, of course, is only a fraction of the total,
Yeah.
And when I first got sober, I went all over the place. I traveled all over Sydney, every suburb. because I had so much time on my hands. I used to fill it in. But these days, I do a lot of meetings basically around the Northern Beaches, which is where our home group is. So it's hard to tell, the shifts and the changes. But the main thing is if you have enough diversity, that people who come in are able to find what suits them,
Yeah.
And rather than, I've been to, in the US and Canada, some fairly Christian-y meetings,
Yeah.
So as long as you're going to toe that line, you're fine.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how the United States and Canada is like that, and I guess the other parts of the world really aren't. I don't get to travel very often, so it would probably be good for me to experience something like that somewhere, a meeting somewhere else, to see what it's really like. But yeah, here it's all the Lord's Prayer, and
Oh, is it ever? Except for the atheist meeting I went to at Berkeley.
Yeah, they'd be free from that there.
We close. We actually, at our meeting, we have the steps and traditions up, and we close the meeting with the responsibility declaration.
Yeah. And
in our opening blurb about the meeting, to explain to people what we are, we're Alcoholics Anonymous for atheist agnostics. So Quad-A, we took that idea.
Yeah.
And we just say, the steps and traditions are hanging up. We haven't changed them. We're not here to change them, but we believe everybody has the right to interpret them in a way that works for them.
That's exactly what we did. We when we actually first started our group, we thought, me and the guy who started it, we thought about writing our own steps, and we were going to print them up on some big fancy thing and hang them up and so forth. But we decided against it, and a couple of things. Well, first, we were thinking about the situation in Canada where the groups were fighting and stuff about the steps. But then I just said to Jim, I said, well, who are we to say what the steps mean to somebody else anyway? Just let people interpret it from themselves. And we have all these great books that will help people. Yeah. And that's what we did. We started putting the books out for people to look at.
Yeah. Look, you can't carry people. And we were in a similar situation of reading out a modified version from the big book. But, what do you modify it to? And we've got our little display of, atheist-friendly pamphlets from AA. The Living Sober book, which anybody could read. And like that lady that turned up, she bought that. And that's just got lots of practical,
it's a good book.
And we sell the Atheist 12 Steps, the alternative ones, the yellow book. And of course, Adam N's Common Sense Recovery.
Yep.
And then, people say to me, how about the steps? And I tell them about your website, and I say there's podcasts, And because if somebody asks you how it works, there was a guy called Leo from Newtown, and he used to say, you don't have to understand the workings of an internal combustion motor in order to drive a motor car. You just need to know how to start it up, how to brake, accelerate, how to steer, rules of the road.
Good point.
Similarly with the program, you don't have to understand it. And that was the mistake, not a mistake, but the approach I made in the beginning. If I could just understand it all, my sobriety would be better. But for me, I just need to know what to do,
Yeah.
So I don't pick up the first drink. I'm a regular attender of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I try and take the principles in the 12 steps as best as I can to apply them in my life as best as I can. And that has changed over the years. But that requires risk, If you have a very fundamentalist faith, it's black and white. You don't have to think about it,
Right.
When I was going to school, it was very Catholic, and when we were in school, who made the world? God. How long did it take? 7 days.
Yeah.
And end of discussion.
There you go.
Evolution, physics. We don't have to worry about it. So I can see the attraction of that sort of, I don't have to think about it. These people tell me, and this is it.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me, but I can see why. Whereas if you're secular, you're challenging yourself, I think Adam N says in his book that it's probably harder for us as atheists because you don't have the safety net of God to catch you, you know?
I would say that the program really came to life for me when I accepted that I was an atheist, because I really had to stop and think what these things do mean to me. And what it boils down to for me is I came to the conclusion that the belief was not important at all. It's the underlying actions and experiences. And that's what the steps really are. They're just experiences. They're experiences, things that have happened to us that we've learned from or whatever, things that have happened to us, experiences, and then things that we do. And what you believe that empowers you through all of that is really not that material. And whether you believe in God or not, the one thing that we all have in common is each other helping each other through it. So,
isn't it? Yeah.
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 So I'm really comfortable with that.
Yeah. Look, when my eldest son was born, he was wound up in intensive care. Like, things went wrong, and he's okay now. But you know, so he's in this special care nursery. My wife's there with tubes out of her. You know, so after about a week, I hadn't been to a meeting. You can imagine how I was, you know, all over the place. And she said to me, you know, you need to go to a meeting. And I says, you know, I don't want to leave here. And she says, well, you can't do anything. You know, he's okay, I'm okay. And she said, you need a meeting. So, you know, I didn't get on my knees and ask God to help me. I just took myself to a meeting that I was familiar with. I sat down between these two lovely elderly ladies, you know, Roma and Natalie. Mm-hmm. And they just let me sit there and just be me, you know.
Yeah.
And I just felt love and concern, you know. Yeah. And that's I've experienced a fair bit of that. And, you know, I just had enough to finish off that day and go on to the next day. And I mean, everything didn't work out in the end, but that's sort of, you know, I was, you know, walking up the road after a meeting one day in between two old timers, and I was very new, and I just felt safe, you know. I just felt. These guys, they said, look, it will get better. You keep coming back. Without any, you know, benevolent being that I could sort of ask for help, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of comfort in that. I used to sometimes, when I was having a really hard time, I would just stop and close my eyes and imagine my home group. One day in particular, actually, I was only sober, I don't know, 30, 60 days or whatever. And I turned myself into the bondsman, the bail bondsman, and they took me to jail. And that was a horrible experience. But I just kept thinking about my home group, you know, and it kind of got me through that. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting story. But that's how I had to go to had to face up to my last DWI. And I did it by turning myself into the bail bondsman and throwing myself at the mercy of the court, basically.
That's putting the steps in your life. Look, there's another saying in AA. They used to say, you know, some people will say, well, the truth will set you free. And somebody with your story will say, well, it'll actually get you locked up.
I was insane, basically. I was really totally paranoid. It's like every time I saw a police car, I'd think they were after me. So I turned myself into the bondsman because I couldn't stand walking on the street anymore. Oh, Lord. That was crazy.
You can laugh at it now, but at the time, it's scary. That's why I'd say with new people, you know, don't change too much in your life, you know.
Right.
Because it's good advice they used to say, you know, don't get into a relationship in the first 2 years, which many people don't. But, you know, don't make big decisions.
I think it's pretty wise to not do. It is. Yeah. Because you're really not at your best. It takes a little while to kind of get settled down.
Look, I used to think, you'll laugh at this, but I was going to meetings and I wanted to get sober, and I thought I need to get this God thing. And I went to a steps meeting, and on the way home I had this number going through my head, 220 or something, and I said, oh, this is God talking to me. Now this is 3 months sober.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I did it, but I looked up some airline timetable, and flight 220 was a flight from Sydney to Auckland in New Zealand. Oh. And I thought, I gotta
go to New Zealand.
Fly over there. And luckily I ran this past an old timer, and he said, I think you shouldn't, I think you should give that a miss. And stay where you are.
That's funny.
But look, you have lots of crazy thoughts, but as long as you don't act on them, you know.
Yeah.
There was a guy, John from Hunters Hill, And because I used to worry about if I was thinking of having a drink or having a desire to have a drink, you know, early sobriety, or drinking dreams.
Oh yeah, I still have them.
And there's some people that tell you, oh, you're not on the program. You know, if you're having that, there's something wrong. But, you know, he says, you know, when the thought of a drink crosses his mind, he says, well, how about that, John? You're still an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And see, these are these things I latch onto. That there's another line, Bill from Paddle says, you know, it's okay to be not okay.
Yeah,
you know,
that's absolutely right.
So when you're new, it's like the you know, you're focused on yourself, and there's a whole pile of things wrong, and there's all these people sober, and you just haven't got the experience to know what it is you need to do. It's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? You know, you got to get a bit sober, get a bit of experience to know what it is that's going to work for you, you know?
Yeah.
But it's been great, John, being sober. Best thing ever, you know? And having the Brookvale meeting now is, you know, put us on the map, and to see how, you know.
It's been nice to hear the story, and it's been really nice to talk with you, and thank you very much for doing this. And also thank you for contributing to your story to AA Beyond Belief. That was really nice.
Yeah.
If you ever get to travel to the United States, I hope you find your way to Kansas City, Missouri, and you stop and say hello. Yep.
Well, I will make that happen in the next couple of years. I'm overdue a trip, so that'll be good. Yeah.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon enough with another episode for your listening pleasure. Until then, don't drink, go to meetings, and help others.